I want you to imagine the absolute happiest, most celebrated financial milestone in a traditional, highly obedient middle-class life. A hard-working, completely exhausted citizen diligently saves their money, buys a modest piece of real estate or a handful of index funds, holds onto them for 20 agonizing years, and finally watches the value magically double. They are incredibly excited. They feel a massive, overwhelming rush of dopamine because they genuinely believe they have finally won the ultimate financial game. So they do exactly what the traditional financial matrix has completely brainwashed them to do since they were a young child. They aggressively sell the asset. They cash out. They look at the massive pile of glowing green cash sitting in their checking account and they celebrate with their family. But the exact second they press that sell button and execute that transaction, a massive, terrifying, and completely invisible government alarm violently rings. The federal tax agency aggressively kicks down their door, reaches directly into their bank account, and legally confiscates 20 to 30% of their absolute total profit through a brutal, highly efficient mathematical mechanism called the capital gains tax. The citizen worked for 2 decades, they sacrificed their youth, they took absolutely all of the terrifying financial risk. They endured all of the brutal stock market crashes, and the government simply stepped in at the very last second and violently extracted a massive slice of the reward. The brainwashed middle class completely accepts this massive theft as a normal, unavoidable patriotic duty. But today, I am going to expose a financial reality so incredibly dark, so highly guarded, and so mathematically untouchable that you will absolutely never, ever look at selling a winning investment the exact same way for the rest of your natural life. The true, untouchable global elite completely and utterly despise the concept of selling an asset. To a multi-billionaire, selling a cash-flowing asset or a highly valuable piece of commercial real estate is an absolute mathematical tragedy. It is the ultimate financial sin. In this massive video, we are going to violently unplug you from the toxic, deeply ingrained illusion of the capital gains tax. We are going to expose the brutal mathematics of how the government permanently keeps you impoverished by manipulating your psychological fear and convincing you to constantly cash out. We are going to explain the terrifying, highly lucrative, and completely hidden power of tax-free debt. And we are going to show you exactly how the true masters of the economic universe use a completely legal, absolutely bulletproof strategy known as buy, borrow, die to completely avoid paying taxes for generations. And if you stick with me until the absolute end of this video, I will give you the exact step-by-step psychological escape plan to completely assassinate your middle class. Fear of debt, permanently weaponize the highly rigged banking system entirely in your favor and transition from an overtaxed, heavily bleeding consumer into an untouchable, financially invisible master of capital leverage. To truly understand the absolute magnitude of this massive global tax loophole, we must completely deconstruct the exact legal mechanism that actively triggers a tax bill in the modern world. The government taxation matrix is incredibly sophisticated and highly efficient, but it has one massive, fundamental, completely undeniable blind spot. You are only legally required to pay capital gains taxes when you officially realize a profit. And the absolute only way you legally realize a profit is the exact second you sell the asset. As long as you aggressively hold on to the physical real estate, the massive private business empire, or the highly diversified stock portfolio, the government cannot legally touch a single solitary penny of your growing wealth, even if the value skyrockets by tens of millions of dollars. The massive wealth exists entirely on paper. It is completely invisible to the government tax collector. But this creates a massive, seemingly impossible psychological problem for the completely average, mathematically blind middle-class brain. If you never ever sell your highly valuable assets, how do you actually buy the massive luxury mansions, the private jets, and the exclusive tropical islands? How do you actually physically enjoy the wealth if it is completely locked away inside a commercial real estate building or an untouchable digital stock portfolio? The terrified middle class deeply believes the absolute only way to access the money is to violently kill the golden goose, sell the asset, pay the massive government tax penalty, and use whatever miserable, highly depleted scraps are left over to try and buy their lifestyle. This fatal misunderstanding is exactly where the elite deploy the most brilliant, highly aggressive, and completely legal financial weapon in human history. Welcome to the ultimate billionaire strategy: buy, borrow, die. Let us look at the brutal, undeniable mathematical reality of exactly how this works in the dark, hidden, mahogany boardrooms of the global elite. Phase 1 is the buy phase. The elite aggressively use their highly lethal, high-income skills and their massive business cash flow to acquire massive, appreciating, completely untouchable hard assets. They absolutely do not buy rapidly depreciating luxury cars, they do not buy heavily branded designer clothing, and they do not keep their money rotting in a completely useless savings account. They aggressively buy massive apartment complexes, sprawling commercial warehouses, and highly diversified index funds. They completely secure the golden goose, and they lock it away entirely inside an invisible, impenetrable titanium legal fortress of corporate trusts and limited liability companies. They are completely obsessed with absolute ownership. Phase 2 is where the financial matrix is completely shattered and inverted. It is the borrow phase, when the multi-billionaire eventually wants to completely fund their incredibly lavish, ultra-luxurious lifestyle. They absolutely refuse to sell a single physical brick of their real estate empire or a single digital share of their massive stock portfolio. Selling triggers the massive, terrifying tax event, and the elite view taxes as a completely voluntary penalty for the financially uneducated. Instead, the elite investor confidently walks past the completely normal, highly depressing retail banking lobby, where the middle class begs for tiny car loans. They take a private elevator directly up to the highly exclusive, incredibly quiet private wealth management floor. They sit down at a heavy, polished table. They confidently place the legal ownership documents of their massive, glowing golden assets directly onto the table. And they aggressively demand a completely tax-free line of credit. They use their own massive, highly stable assets as collateral to legally borrow tens of millions of dollars in completely liquid, untraceable cash from the banking institution. This is the exact moment you must violently wake up from your childhood financial programming. In the highly complex, totally rigged tax code of the modern world, borrowed money is absolutely not classified as income. Debt is completely, entirely, and absolutely tax-free. The federal government cannot legally tax a bank loan because it is technically a massive financial liability that must legally be paid back. So the private bank happily hands the billionaire a massive, overflowing bag of glowing green cash. The billionaire completely bypasses the massive government tax collector, who is left standing outside the bank with a completely empty bucket, entirely powerless to stop the transaction. The billionaire takes that massive bag of tax-free debt and immediately uses it to buy the private jet, fund the massive luxury European vacations, and live exactly like an untouchable king, entirely without ever reporting a single dollar of income to the Internal Revenue Service. But you are probably screaming at the glowing screen right now, completely paralyzed by your deeply ingrained middle-class fear of debt. You have been taught your entire life that debt is evil and dangerous. You are asking, how do they possibly afford to pay the massive monthly interest on that massive multi-million-dollar loan? This is the beautiful, completely ruthless, and highly sophisticated mathematics of the elite, because the billionaire is using highly secure, highly valuable, completely tangible assets as collateral. The bank gives them an incredibly low, completely preferential interest rate, often hovering around 3 or 4%, while the billionaire is paying a tiny, microscopic 4% interest rate to the private bank for the completely tax-free cash. Their original, massive golden asset is still actively growing and compounding in the background at an aggressive 8, 10, or 12% every single year. The asset is literally mathematically growing significantly faster than the actual cost of the debt. The massive compounding growth completely cancels out the interest payments. The billionaire is literally getting paid by the mathematics of the universe to borrow money. They are living in absolute total luxury entirely for free, while their true net worth actively explodes upwards in complete invisible silence. And we have not even discussed the absolute most terrifying, highly destructive secret weapon that the elite use to completely erase the debt. That secret weapon is inflation. The exact same inflation that completely destroys the purchasing power of the middle-class worker is aggressively working as a massive, invisible servant for the elite borrower. If you borrow $10 million from the bank today, and inflation aggressively runs at 5% every single year, the actual real-world value of that $10 million debt is completely melting away. In 10 years, that massive debt is mathematically significantly cheaper to pay off because the fiat currency has completely lost its value. The elite absolutely love massive government money printing because every single time the government prints new money, the elite's massive hard assets completely skyrocket in value, while their fixed-rate debt becomes completely worthless and incredibly easy to eliminate. The middle class is completely crushed by the heavy weight of inflation, while the elite aggressively use inflation to entirely vaporize their massive tax-free loans. Now we must look at the absolute final, most mathematically terrifying phase of this massive multi-generational strategy. Phase 3. Die. The deeply brainwashed middle-class worker spends their entire miserable life absolutely terrified of death, eventually leaving behind a massive, complicated mess of heavily taxed retirement accounts and unpaid medical bills for their completely unprepared children to violently fight over in a dark, depressing probate court. The elite investor approaches the concept of death as the absolute ultimate, final, and entirely brilliant tax loophole. When the billionaire finally passes away from old age, they still completely hold the massive, untouched original assets, and they technically still owe the massive private bank loan. But because of an incredibly powerful, deeply hidden federal tax law known as the step-up in basis, the entire financial matrix completely magically resets entirely in their family's favor. When the billionaire's children legally inherit the massive commercial real estate empire and the untouchable stock portfolio, the government magically and completely erases absolutely all of the historical capital gains. The legal taxable value of the massive asset is completely reset to the exact market value on the exact day the billionaire died. If the billionaire bought a massive commercial building for $1 million 50 long years ago, and it is now mathematically worth $100 million, the government completely ignores the $99 million of pure, untouched profit. The massive tax bill completely vanishes into thin air. The children inherit the massive asset entirely tax-free. They immediately sell a tiny, microscopic fraction of the massive empire to fully pay off the completely tax-free bank loan their parents used to fund their lavish luxury lifestyle, and they securely keep the rest of the massive, glowing golden empire completely intact. The massive wealth was aggressively built over decades. The lavish luxury lifestyle was completely funded by tax-free debt. The assets were successfully transferred to the exact next generation, and the massive government tax extraction machine received absolutely $0 in capital gains taxes. The mathematical circle is completely, perfectly, and ruthlessly closed forever. The massive corporate financial matrix has successfully convinced you that absolutely all debt is inherently evil. They actively train you to be incredibly terrified of credit, desperately rushing to completely pay off your low-interest, 30-year fixed mortgage, while the invisible monster of inflation silently destroys your purchasing power. They completely weaponize your primitive fear of debt to ensure that you only ever use high-interest credit cards to buy rapidly depreciating consumer garbage and luxury clothing, while the true elite aggressively use massive, highly structured, incredibly low-interest debt to completely buy the entire world. Debt is exactly like a massive, terrifying, roaring fire. If you are completely uneducated, highly impulsive, and financially illiterate, that fire will completely burn your entire house down and totally destroy your family's future. But if you are highly educated, deeply calculating, and mathematically cold, you can aggressively capture that exact same fire, control it, and use it to power a massive, unstoppable steam engine that violently drives your multi-generational wealth forward into the future. If you are listening to this exact sentence right now, and you feel a massive, heavy iron chain violently snapping inside your mind, completely realizing that your entire lifelong fear of debt and your toxic desire to sell your winning investments has been completely keeping you impoverished, you are officially stepping completely out of the middle-class matrix. But I must issue a very serious, incredibly urgent warning right now. You absolutely cannot simply walk into a massive commercial bank tomorrow morning, slam your completely empty wallet on the desk, and aggressively demand a massive line of credit. You absolutely cannot use this highly aggressive, completely elite strategy if your only physical asset is a rapidly depreciating luxury car or a highly fragile, totally manipulated cryptocurrency portfolio. This massive strategy requires absolute, undeniable psychological patience, highly lethal income skills, and the aggressive, relentless accumulation of highly stable, income-producing hard assets. Grab a heavy pen and a blank piece of paper right now. Eliminate absolutely all distractions completely around you, violently turn off your glowing television screen, and strictly prepare to execute this actionable step-by-step escape plan to permanently assassinate your fear of debt, aggressively manipulate the banking system, and forcefully transition from a highly taxed, heavily bleeding consumer into an untouchable, mathematically lethal master of the buy, borrow, die strategy. Rule number 1. You must completely, radically, and violently reprogram your entire psychological relationship with the concept of debt. You must permanently stop viewing absolutely all debt as a massive moral failing or a terrifying financial burden. You must deeply and profoundly understand that in a rapidly inflating fiat currency system, fixed-rate debt directly attached to an appreciating hard asset is the absolute greatest financial weapon ever invented by humanity. You must aggressively and ruthlessly separate toxic, high-interest consumer debt from highly optimized, massive, elite investment debt. You must completely eradicate absolutely all high-interest credit card debt from your life immediately and begin actively viewing low-interest, asset-backed lines of credit as your permanent, totally tax-free escape hatch from the violent government matrix. Rule number 2. You must aggressively initiate a massive, relentless pursuit of holding high-quality assets completely forever. You must completely and violently assassinate the toxic, impulsive middle-class desire to constantly cash out when you see a tiny, microscopic bit of profit on your screen. Your new, absolute permanent financial goal is to be a massive, invisible, gravitational black hole for high-quality assets. Once a piece of commercial real estate, a highly profitable business equity share, or a broad market index fund enters your completely invisible financial fortress, it absolutely never, ever leaves. You absolutely do not sell your assets to buy a luxury car. You absolutely do not sell your assets to go on a flashy vacation. You aggressively and silently hoard the golden geese, completely allowing them to profoundly compound and multiply entirely in the dark, building the massive, heavy foundation required to eventually approach the commercial banks for massive leverage. Rule number 3. You must completely embrace the absolute, undeniable superpower of extreme strategic patience. The buy, borrow, die strategy is absolutely not a cheap, highly manipulated, get-rich-quick scheme. It is a slow, highly calculating, deeply mathematical, multi-decade war against the entire financial matrix. You must completely dedicate the Next 10 years to aggressively building your high-income skills, violently slashing your completely useless luxury expenses, and relentlessly stacking massive, undeniable hard assets. You must completely endure the temporary psychological pain of quietly building the invisible financial fortress entirely in the dark today, so that in 15 years, you can confidently walk into the commercial bank, legally borrow heavily against your massive, completely untouchable empire, and completely fund your absolute financial freedom entirely without ever triggering a single, solitary, taxable event for the rest of your life. Let us completely summarize this brutal, completely mind-bending reality before you go out and take massive, life-changing action today. The modern tax system is a perfectly designed, highly efficient psychological trap. They aggressively and constantly condition you to sell your assets and realize your gains so they can violently extract their massive percentage of your hard work. The traditional financial advice to completely avoid all debt and constantly take your profits is the absolute most dangerous, toxic, and mathematically destructive financial advice in the modern world. It mathematically guarantees that you will completely remain a highly taxed, constantly bleeding target, permanently trapped on an exhausting, rusty hamster wheel of endless capital gains extraction. The absolute only possible way to completely win this entirely rigged game is to violently unplug yourself from the psychological fear of debt, aggressively accumulate massive hard assets completely forever, and forcefully adopt the invisible, untouchable, godlike lifestyle of tax-free leverage exactly like a true master of the universe. If this terrifying, reality-shattering information finally completely opened your eyes, if you feel like I just violently ripped you entirely out of the capital gains matrix and finally handed you the absolute dark truth about exactly how the global elite actually completely bypassed the tax code, then I absolutely need you to completely destroy that like button and aggressively subscribe to the channel right now. You absolutely cannot afford to miss the extremely high-level, highly aggressive wealth-building strategies we have coming up next on this massive reality-breaking channel. And speaking of massive financial traps that are specifically engineered to completely lock up your capital and mathematically guarantee that Wall Street violently extracts massive fees from your life savings while you are completely terrified to even touch your own money. If you truly want to deeply understand the absolute biggest, most highly manipulative lie ever told by the traditional retirement industry, and exactly how the concept of the standard 401k plan is a massive psychological prison designed to lock your money away entirely until you are completely too old to enjoy it, you absolutely have to watch this video right here on the screen. In it, I completely and ruthlessly break down the ultimate Wall Street lockup illusion, and I show you exactly why the true elite completely refuse to hand their capital over to greedy mutual fund managers, choosing instead to aggressively build massive private empires they completely control today. Click that video right now. Your future, highly liquid, absolutely untethered, and tax-free self will eternally thank you. I will see you over there on the completely other side.